ALEATORY podcast.
You know, when we picture the human body, we generally visualize it as this incredibly resilient, brilliantly engineered system.
Oh, absolutely. It's a marvel.
Right, and there are all these built-in biological fail-safes designed purely to keep us alive. I mean, if you run too hard, your muscles flood with lactic acid, and your brain sends this overwhelming signal to just stop.
It physically forces you to slow down.
Exactly. Or, if you get too hot, you sweat to bring your core temperature down. When you get dangerously thirsty, your body demands water. These are the natural limitations of our physical form.
The boundaries that keep us functioning, yeah.
But consider what happens when someone decides to simply, override those limits. Imagine a scenario where the pursuit of glory, combined with the extreme hubris of early, completely unchecked science, dictates that those natural biological fail-safes are nothing more than inconvenient obstacles.
This is an incredibly unsettling premise because once you bypass those inherent protective mechanisms, you're no longer engaged in a test of endurance. You cross a line into profound physiological trauma.
You really do.
You are deliberately forcing the human form to the absolute brink of systemic failure.
Right. And I want to set a scene for you listening right now. Just visualize this situation. You are pushing your body harder than you ever have in your entire life. You are exhausted. Your legs are heavy, and you are quite literally suffering from acute dehydration in sweltering, oppressive heat.
Just a miserable state to be in.
So naturally, you look to the people on the sidelines, right? The medical professionals, the officials, the people who are supposedly there to monitor you and ensure your safety.
You'd expect them to help.
But instead of offering aid, you realize they are just observing you. You aren't a competitor to them. You are a subject in an experiment.
That is just a state of complete vulnerability. The realization that the very authorities tasked with overseeing the event are the actual architects of the conditions you are suffering through.
Now, picture a man in the final stages of this ordeal. He is actively hallucinating. His skin has turned this ghastly ashen gray. His eyes are completely deadened, just devoid of any focus.
Essentially shutting down.
Completely. His feet are literally dragging through the dirt because he no longer has the neurological capacity to lift his legs. And the only way he is crossing the finish line is because he is being physically suspended in the air by two men on either side of him.
It's terrifying.
And the only reason his heart hasn't stopped is that these men have been periodically pouring a mixture of raw eggs and actual rat poison down his throat.
It sounds medieval. I mean, it certainly does not align with our modern conception of a celebration of human athletic achievement.
No, it really doesn't. But this actually happened. Welcome to the episode. Together, we turn knowledge into real results. And today, we are examining an event that defies logic, reason, and basic human empathy.
It is a historical moment that forces us to look closely at the foundations of how human potential was measured a century ago, and how the boundaries of scientific observation were applied to grand public spectacles.
Because to understand how a man ends up being poisoned with strychnine and physically carried across a finish line, we have to understand the specific stage where this took place. So, we are traveling back to August 1904.
St. Louis, Missouri.
Yes, St. Louis. The backdrop is the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which, most people know as the 1904 World's Fair.
The context of the World's Fair is essential here, because today, global athletic competitions are isolated, highly regulated environments built specifically for elite athletes. Host cities spend billions on infrastructure just for the games.
Oh, for sure. Entire villages are built.
Right. But in 1904, the athletic events were essentially a sideshow. The true draw, the global spectacle, was the fair itself.
And the scale of this fair is almost hard to wrap your head around. Over its 6-month run, it drew an estimated 20 million visitors.
20 million. That's staggering for the early 20th century.
20 million people flocking to St. Louis to see the marvels of the modern age. I mean, they had exhibits on electricity, the first airplanes, the newest automobiles. The athletic competition was just a disorganized addition to this massive cultural carnival. And the crazy part is, the games weren't even supposed to be in St. Louis in the first place.
Correct. The organizers originally awarded the games to Chicago.
Right.
However, the leadership in St. Louis viewed this as a direct threat. They were concerned that Chicago would draw crowds away from their World's Fair. So the St. Louis organizers employed an aggressive tactic.
They basically held it hostage.
They did. They threatened to host a rival, heavily funded athletic competition that would run at the exact same time as the Chicago Games. It was specifically designed to lure the best athletes away with massive financial incentives.
They completely forced the issue. It was a hostile takeover of a global sporting event. The political maneuvering got so intense that President Theodore Roosevelt actually had to step in and urge the shift to St. Louis just to resolve the conflict.
It was a chaotic foundation from the very beginning.
So you have this incredibly financially motivated, hastily arranged competition. And the resulting atmosphere in St. Louis was this bizarre mix of brilliant innovation and, frankly, sheer absurdity.
It really was an environment of extremes. Because on one hand, you have the spontaneous creation of modern culinary staples,
Yeah.
born entirely out of the desperate conditions of the fair itself.
Oh, the iced tea and the ice cream cone. I love this detail.
Oh.
It was oppressively hot in St. Louis that summer, just relentless, suffocating heat.
Unbearable.
And at the Far East Tea House exhibit, the staff had all this hot tea, and absolutely no one wanted to drink it. Out of pure desperation, they started pouring the hot tea over ice cubes. And suddenly, iced tea becomes the most popular beverage at the fair.
A completely improvised solution.
And right nearby, there's a teenager named Arnold Forneshoe selling ice cream. He runs out of paper dishes, which, should have been a disaster. But the vendor next to him, a Syrian immigrant named Ernest Hamwi, is selling these very thin, crisp waffles. Arnold grabs a waffle, rolls it into a cone shape, drops the ice cream inside, and they invent the ice cream cone right there on the spot.
It perfectly illustrates the ingenuity that can emerge under pressure.
Yeah.
But that same chaotic environment also hosted some of the most farcical events ever recorded in athletic history.
Oh, the events they put on were ridiculous. They had something called the plunge for distance.
Right, I've read about this.
Some competitors would dive into a pool and just float. No swimming, no movement. Whoever drifted the furthest before they had to take a breath was the winner. They also had a tug-of-war event where teams just dragged each other across the dirt.
Though we should also mention George Iser, an American gymnast who competed that year, because he put on a genuinely remarkable display of physical capability.
He really did.
He won 6 medals, including 3 golds. And what makes his performance notable is that he achieved this while competing with a solid wood prosthetic leg, having lost his natural leg in a train accident.
Which is an incredible feat of athleticism. You have to respect that. But then, right alongside athletes like Iser, the fair organizers staged an event they called Anthropology Days.
This is a deeply uncomfortable historical fact of the 1904 gathering. The organizers brought in indigenous people from various global populations groups they categorized at the time as uncivilized tribes.
It's so patronizing.
It was. They then organized a sideshow, specifically designed to pit these individuals against one another in events like mud fighting and rock throwing.
It was a stark reflection of the era. So you have this sprawling, chaotic environment. You have early industrial technology, rampant commercialism, highly questionable pseudoscience, and a completely unregulated approach to human competition.
All swirling together in the stifling Missouri heat.
Think of it as a sprawling Roman circus colliding with an unregulated Victorian science laboratory. And the man running the most dangerous experiment in that laboratory was James E. Sullivan.
James E. Sullivan was the chief organizer of the Games. He was also a founder of the Amateur Athletic Union and a figure who held immense influence over the direction of early American sports.
And Sullivan had a specific physiological theory that he was determined to test on the 32 men who lined up for the marathon.
Right. But before we get into his theory, we should look at the raw logistics of the race day, because it sets the stakes.
Yeah, let's lay that out. The date is August 30th. The course they mapped out is 24.85 miles long. The temperature is sitting at over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is over 32 degrees Celsius.
And the humidity is hovering around 90%.
It is the kind of thick, suffocating heat where just standing outside makes you sweat. And James E. Sullivan, the chief organizer, decides that across this nearly 25-mile course, he is going to provide exactly 2 water stations.
A water tower at the 6-mile mark and a single ground well at the 12-mile mark. That was the extent of the official hydration.
Geostate?
For the final roughly 13 miles of the race, the runners were provided with absolutely no water.
I have to stop and ask you to explain the medical mindset here. How does a chief sporting official in 1904 look at a 25-mile race in 90-degree heat and conclude that depriving athletes of water is a solid operational plan? I mean, what is the rationale?
It stems from his belief in a concept known at the time as purposeful dehydration. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a prevailing thought among certain sports scientists and trainers that ingesting water during intense physical exertion was actually detrimental.
Detrimental. Wait, how?
They believed that drinking water would dilute the blood, upset the digestive system, cause severe muscle cramps, and lead to a condition they called constitutional softness.
So the prevailing wisdom was literally that drinking water makes you physically weak. That is, I mean, that's completely backward.
It is. But the logic suggested that a truly conditioned body,
Mm.
a system that possessed true physiological hardness, should be able to function at maximum output without constant replenishment. Sullivan didn't view the marathon merely as a race to see who is the fastest.
He viewed it as an experiment.
Exactly, a controlled laboratory trial. He wanted to observe exactly how long the human machine could operate under extreme duress before it completely seized up.
It is staggering to think about the position that puts the runners in. You have 32 men who have trained for this, trusting that the organizers have set up a functional race. And instead, they're essentially being subjected to a severe physiological stress test without their informed consent.
To fully grasp the danger, we need to look at the biomechanics of what happens to a human running in 90-degree heat with 90% humidity.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, when the air is that saturated with moisture, your sweat cannot evaporate. Sweating only cools the body if the moisture evaporates off the skin, taking the heat with it. In 90% humidity, the sweat simply drips off.
So you are losing fluid rapidly, but your core temperature isn't dropping at all.
Exactly. As you lose that water, your overall blood volume begins to decrease. Your blood physically thickens. This forces your heart to pump exponentially harder just to circulate oxygen to the working muscles.
Which is terrifying.
It is. As the core temperature continues to climb unabated, the risk of severe heat stroke, organ failure, and sudden cardiac event becomes imminent.
And Sullivan just fires the starting pistol and sends them out into it. But the purposeful dehydration was only one layer of the danger. I was looking at the actual route they took, and the physical terrain itself was brutal.
The logistics of the course were highly irregular by modern standards.
Irregular is a generous word.
They began with 5 laps around the stadium track, but once they exited the stadium gates, they were routed directly onto the unpaved country roads of St. Louis County.
Unpaved, completely exposed dirt roads, and the elevation profile was punishing. They mapped out a route that included 7 massive hills ranging from 100 to 300 feet high, with incredibly steep, grinding ascents.
The footing was terrible.
Awful. A lot of these roads were just strewn with loose, cracked stone, so every single footfall carried the risk of a rolled ankle or a bad fall. But the most jarring detail about this course is that the roads were not closed to the public.
The concept of a closed circuit for a marathon did not exist in this iteration. The runners were navigating live, active roadways.
They were running a marathon through crosstown traffic. I mean, they are physically dodging commercial delivery wagons pulled by horses. They're sidestepping regional trolley cars and railroad crossings.
There are even historical accounts of runners having to break stride to avoid pedestrians who were just out walking their dogs along the route.
It's pure chaos. It demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of what an endurance event of this scale required in terms of safety and logistics.
But ironically, the greatest hazard on those open roads wasn't the delivery wagons or the pedestrians. It was the official support vehicles.
The fleet of automobiles following the runners. This is such a crucial detail. You have a vanguard of men on horseback riding ahead of the pack to clear the trail, and right behind the runners, you have a caravan of early combustion engine cars carrying the judges, the doctors, and the journalists.
And when you put a fleet of heavy, early model automobiles on dry, unpaved dirt and cracked limestone roads, the mechanical action of the tires pulverizes the surface.
They just churn it up.
They created massive, continuous, billowing clouds of fine limestone dust. The runners were essentially trapped in a mobile dust storm for the entire duration of the race.
I keep trying to understand the thought process of the officials in those cars. They are watching the athletes choke on the dust they're creating. Did they just not notice the damage they were doing, or were they so enamored with the technology of the automobile that they simply didn't care?
It was likely a combination of technological novelty and the specific era's attitude toward athletes. In 1904, the automobile represented the bleeding edge of modernity and progress.
Right. The whole fair was about the future.
Exactly. The entire World's Fair was dedicated to showcasing the future. Having the officials ride in motor cars lent a sense of prestige and authority to the event. Combine that with Sullivan's view of the runners as subjects in a stress test, and the comfort or safety of the athletes was entirely secondary to the spectacle of the event itself.
And the physical toll of that dust was immediate. Let's look at what happened to William Garcia of California. He was considered one of the top favorites to win. But he didn't just cramp up and drop out.
No, his situation was far more severe.
He was found lying completely unconscious in a ditch on the side of the road. When the medical staff finally got to him, they realized he was suffering from severe internal hemorrhaging.
The sheer volume of limestone dust he had inhaled from the cars had coated his esophagus and severely damaged his stomach lining.
The dust literally tore up his insides.
The inhalation of fine particulate matter, especially an abrasive substance like limestone dust, acts incredibly destructively on the mucosal linings of the respiratory and digestive tracts. It causes severe, rapid inflammation and internal bleeding. Garcia was very close to becoming a fatal casualty of the course conditions.
He wasn't the only favorite taken out by the environment. Michael Spring, a highly conditioned runner from New York who had just won the Boston Marathon that same year, was leading the pack early on. He hits one of those brutal 300-foot hills, becomes completely exhausted by the heat, and just collapses.
Even the champions couldn't handle it.
John Lorden, who won the Boston Marathon in 1903, makes it about 10 miles into the dust before he starts violently vomiting and has to abandon the race entirely.
The structured traditional training of the professional favorites was systematically neutralized by the extreme environmental variables. And this created a vacuum in the race.
A massive vacuum.
When the highly conditioned athletes began to fall, it opened the field to competitors who possessed a much more raw, unconventional type of endurance.
This brings us to the competitors, who had absolutely no business being in an Olympic marathon, but who somehow managed to survive the chaos better than the champions. We have to start with Felix Carvajal.
He might be the most unlikely Olympic competitor in history.
Oh, without a doubt. His entry into the race was completely devoid of traditional athletic preparation or sponsorship. Felix was a 5'1" postman from Havana, Cuba.
A postman.
Yes, a postman. He hears about the marathon in St. Louis and decides he wants to run it. He has no federation backing him, no trainer, and zero funding. So his solution is to quit his job, walk down to the central public square in Havana, stand on a soapbox, and physically ask the crowds passing by for donations to fund his journey.
It shows an immense amount of charisma and determination. He actually succeeds in raising the funds for his passage, but his journey north does not go according to plan.
Not at all. He takes a boat to New Orleans, and once he arrives, he gets involved in a crap game and loses every single cent of the money he raised.
Every second.
He is completely stranded in Louisiana, but he is so determined to make it to the starting line that he hitchhikes from New Orleans to St. Louis. He travels over 700 miles, mostly on foot and catching rides on horse-drawn wagons. He finally arrives at the fairgrounds just as the runners are lining up for the start.
And he arrives in a tire that is completely antithetical to a 40-kilometer endurance event in extreme heat.
He shows up on the starting line wearing his official Cuban postman uniform. He has on a heavy long-sleeve shirt, dark, heavy trousers, and the thick leather street shoes with a pronounced heel.
Just terrible footwear for running.
The race officials take one look at him and actually have to delay the start of the marathon so someone can find a pair of scissors and hack off his sleeves and his pant legs above the knee just so he won't immediately collapse from heat stroke.
The improvisational nature of his participation is striking. Yet, despite his lack of preparation and his heavy footwear, his performance on the course defies expectations.
While the Boston Marathon winners are collapsing in ditches and vomiting, Felix is having a great time. He doesn't seem bothered by the pace at all.
He was treating it like a parade.
He really was. He is running alongside the edge of the road, having full animated conversations with the spectators in broken English. At multiple points, he literally turns around and runs backward down the course just so he can keep facing the crowd and chatting with them.
If we look at his background, his cardiovascular baseline was likely built through years of walking long delivery routes in the high heat and humidity of Havana.
Right. He was used to the climate.
His body was accustomed to slow, sustained exertion under the sun. Furthermore, he wasn't burdened by the psychological pressure of trying to set a world record. He was naturally pacing himself.
But his lack of preparation catches up with him in a very unique way. Because he lost all his money in New Orleans, he hasn't eaten a proper meal in roughly 40 hours.
He is starving.
Exactly. So mid-race, he sees a race official in one of the support cars eating some peaches. Felix jogs up to the car, asks for a peach. The official refuses. So Felix just playfully snatches 2 peaches right out of the car and eats them while he keeps running.
Introducing unwashed, unpeeled fruit into an empty stomach while the body is under the extreme stress of a marathon is a recipe for severe gastrointestinal distress.
And the peaches didn't even fill him up. A bit further down the road, the course passes by a farmer's orchard. Felix literally leaves the marathon route, jogs into the orchard, and starts pulling green apples off the trees and eating them.
Just right off the branch.
And the apples happen to be rotten.
The ingestion of unripe, spoiled apples rapidly caused intense stomach cramping.
The cramps get so bad that Felix decides he needs a break. He finds a shady spot on the side of the road, lies down in the grass, and goes to sleep.
He takes a nap.
He takes a nap in the middle of the marathon. And the most astounding part of this entire story is that after he sleeps off the cramps, he wakes up, gets back on the road in his heavy leather shoes, and still manages to finish in 4th place.
It is a profound testament to his natural constitution. Had he been properly nourished, wearing proper athletic footwear, and hadn't stopped to forage and sleep, it is highly probable he would have medaled, if not won, the entire event.
It is an unbelievable sequence of events, but Felix wasn't the only unexpected entry who showed incredible resilience. We also have to look at the 2 South African competitors, Len Tanyen, who wore bib 35, and Jan Mashiani, who wore bib 36.
The context of their participation is deeply tied to the specific historical moment of the 1904 World's Fair.
Right. They were Swana tribesmen, but they hadn't been sent by an athletic federation to compete for their country. They were in St. Louis as living exhibits for a Boer War diorama.
Spectacle for the crowds.
During the Second Boer War, both men had served as actual dispatch runners, meaning they were tasked with running messages across vast, dangerous expanses of territory. The fair organizers brought them over to act out battles for the crowds.
The dominant narrative, pushed by men like Sullivan at the time, often sought to diminish the capabilities of non-white populations. Many observers at the fair refused to believe that Tanyen and Mashiani were educated men.
But they were.
They were, in fact, students at the Orange Free State, because acknowledging their education conflicted with the uncivilized narrative the fair's anthropology exhibits were trying to project.
Yet they find themselves entered into the marathon, becoming the first 2 Black Africans to ever compete in the modern Olympic Games. And given their background as dispatch runners, they possessed exactly the kind of raw, functional endurance needed for this specific chaotic course.
Their stamina was proven in actual war zones.
Observers noted that Len Tanyen was running a spectacular race. He was holding a phenomenal pace, completely unfazed by the heat and the dust that was destroying the American champions.
However, the complete lack of course control intervened in a highly dangerous way.
Because the roads were open, a pack of wild, aggressive dogs wandered onto the marathon route. The dogs locked onto Len Tanyen and immediately started chasing him.
This wasn't just a brief scare either.
No. The dogs chased him for nearly a full mile, forcing him to veer completely off the official course and run for his life through neighboring cornfields. He had to outrun a pack of wild dogs, navigate his way back out of the fields, find the course again, and resume the race.
It's just unbelievable.
And despite all of that, Len Tanyen still finished 9th overall, and Jan Mashiani finished 12th.
Their performance highlights a stark contrast to the highly controlled environments modern athletes train in. These men possessed a survival-based endurance that allowed them to process and navigate sudden, severe external threats and still continue to perform.
So, if we look at the state of the race at this point, the top professionals are collapsing from internal bleeding and heat stroke. The postman is waking up from a nap. The dispatch runner is fighting his way back from a wild dog attack.
The environment is pure chaos.
Pure chaos. And this sets the stage for a competitor named Fred Lors to make a very questionable decision.
The story of Fred Lors provides an interesting look into the psychology of an amateur athlete placed in an overwhelmingly difficult situation.
Fred Lors was a bricklayer from New York City. He worked grueling manual labor during the day and trained at night. He had legitimately earned his spot on the starting line by finishing 5th in the Boston Marathon.
He was a highly capable runner.
He was, but the conditions in St. Louis, the 90-degree heat, the limestone dust, and Sullivan's refusal to provide water eventually break him. At the 9-mile mark, suffering from severe stomach cramps, Fred realizes he cannot physically continue. He officially drops out of the race.
Given the medical risk we've outlined, withdrawing at the 9-mile mark was the most rational decision he could have made to prevent permanent physiological damage.
He drops out, but he is out on a country road and needs to get back to the main stadium to collect his clothes. His manager happens to be driving one of those dust-spewing support automobiles, so Fred just hops into the passenger seat of the car.
It makes sense. He needed a ride back.
But for the next 11 miles of the marathon route, Fred Lors is riding in an automobile, cruising past the other runners who are suffering and dying in the heat, cheerfully waving at the spectators as he drives by.
The visual is almost absurd. The struggling athletes, coated in dust, watching a fellow competitor ride past them in a motor car.
But the unreliability of 1904 technology changes the situation. After driving for 11 miles, the car overheats and breaks down on the side of the road.
Of course it does.
Fred gets out. He has just had an 11-mile rest in the shade. His body has cooled down, his cramps have subsided, and he realizes he is only about 5 miles away from the stadium. Feeling refreshed, he decides to just start jogging the rest of the way.
This specific moment is where the historical debate centers. He chooses to re-enter the field of play.
He runs those final 5 miles, jogs into the stadium, and breaks the finish line tape. The crowd of thousands absolutely erupts. The clock says 3 hours and 13 minutes.
A seemingly heroic victory.
The spectators believe a hometown American hero has just conquered this brutal race. Photographers swarm him, and Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of the sitting president of the United States, steps forward holding a laurel wreath, fully prepared to place it on his head and award him the gold medal.
You have to analyze his intent here. When he crossed that line, was he executing a calculated fraud to steal the Olympic victory? Or, as he later insisted, was it a practical joke that simply escalated faster than he anticipated due to the crowd's reaction?
It's hard to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if you run 9 miles, sit in a car for 11 miles, and jog the last 5, you are fully aware you didn't win the race.
You definitely know.
The honest reaction to breaking the tape is to immediately put your hands up and tell the judges, I dropped out at mile 9, I'm just running back to the locker room. But he didn't do that. He stopped, he posed for the photographs, and he let the president's daughter approach him with the wreath.
The psychology of a massive crowd is a powerful force, though. It is entirely plausible that a young bricklayer, suddenly engulfed by the deafening cheers of tens of thousands of people, simply froze and allowed himself to succumb to the fantasy of the moment for a few minutes.
That's a fair point.
The distinction between a joke and a fraud is often defined by when the individual decides to confess. And Lours did not confess voluntarily.
Exactly. He was caught. Before the wreath could be placed on his head, a spectator, or perhaps one of the officials who had seen him riding in the passenger seat of the car earlier, shouts out that he had driven half the course.
The illusion shatters.
The judges immediately confront him. Fred confesses on the spot, smiling and claiming it was all just a prank. The Amateur Athletic Union officials do not find it funny at all, and they immediately slap him with a lifetime ban from competition.
It's worth noting that the ban was overturned less than a year later. After reviewing the case and receiving a formal apology, officials concluded he hadn't planned a premeditated fraud.
And the craziest postscript to the Fred Lours story is that after his ban is lifted, he enters the 1905 Boston Marathon and actually wins the entire thing legitimately.
He proved his athletic merit.
He proved he really was a world-class athlete, which just makes the car ride even stranger. But back in St. Louis, Lours is disqualified. The crowd is confused. The officials realize they don't actually have a winner yet. They're looking down the road, waiting to see who is going to emerge from the dust.
And this brings us to the actual winner of the marathon.
The story of Thomas Hicks.
The ordeal of Thomas Hicks is not a narrative of athletic triumph. It is a meticulous examination of medical malpractice and the terrifying lengths to which trainers would go when operating without ethical or regulatory boundaries.
Thomas Hicks was a brass worker from Massachusetts running for the American team. He was considered a strong contender. And for the first 10 miles of the race, he was performing very well.
He was setting a solid pace.
But the compounding variables, the 90-degree heat, the humidity, the dust, and James E. Sullivan's intentional lack of water stations began to systematically shut his body down.
As he passed the 10-mile mark, the physiological strain of acute dehydration became severe. He began to physically falter. In his distress, he begged his support crew, specifically his lead trainer Charles J.P. Lucas, for a drink of water.
And Lucas refuses. The chief organizer had decreed that purposeful dehydration was the test, and Lucas was going to adhere strictly to that pseudoscience.
Despite the obvious signs of distress,
he looks at his severely dehydrated athlete, refuses him water, and instead takes a sponge, dips it in warm distilled water, and just swabs the inside of Hicks' mouth.
Swabbing the mouth provides zero systemic hydration. It is a purely superficial gesture. It does absolutely nothing to replenish the critical loss of blood volume or aid in cord temperature regulation. Hicks's internal systems continued to deteriorate.
By the time Hicks is about 7 miles away from the finish line, he is completely broken. He tells his trainers he wants to lie down, he wants to quit the race, but Charles J.P. Lucas and the rest of the crew refuse to let him stop.
They were determined to win at all costs.
They are determined to have their athlete win. So, to keep him moving, they open their medical bag. And this is where the story shifts from gross negligence into active poisoning.
This is where it gets incredibly dark.
Lucas pulls out a syringe and a vial. He proceeds to feed Thomas Hicks roughly 1 milligram, or about 160th of a grain, of a substance called strychnine sulfate.
Strychnine sulfate is a highly toxic alkaloid. In modern applications, it is utilized almost exclusively as a pesticide, specifically as a lethal poison for rodents.
I have to ask for the biological mechanism here. Why would a trainer look at an exhausted athlete and decide that rat poison is the solution? What did they think it was going to do?
In the medical landscape of 1904, it was believed that in very minute, meticulously controlled doses, strychnine acted as a powerful stimulant to the central nervous system.
The stimulant.
Yes, when an athlete reaches the point of total exhaustion, their nervous system begins sending overwhelming signals to shut the muscles down to prevent structural damage. The strychnine violently overrides those neurological failsafes.
Oh, wow.
It forces the nerves to fire indiscriminately, which forces the exhausted muscles to continue contracting long after they should have stopped.
And they don't just give him the raw poison. They mix the strychnine with raw egg whites, which they force down his throat. And initially, it appears to have the desired effect. The poison forces his legs to keep churning, but the underlying issue hasn't been solved.
Not at all. The strychnine is merely masking the neurological signals of fatigue. It is doing absolutely nothing to address the severe dehydration or the skyrocketing core temperature. The body metabolizes the brief surge of energy, and the systemic collapse accelerates.
A few miles later, Hicks starts to collapse again. His skin is turning a literal shade of gray. Lucas sees the first dose of poison wearing off, and his solution is to administer a second dose.
Double the dosage.
He feeds Hicks more strychnine, more raw egg whites, and this time, he washes the poison down with a heavy pour of French brandy.
Think about the internal systems of the body, like a high-performance mechanical engine. This engine has been running at maximum RPMs for hours in a scorching desert.
Right.
It is completely run out of oil that represents the severe dehydration.
Yeah.
The internal metal components are grinding against each other, overheating, on the verge of seizing up completely.
A rational person would stop the engine and add oil.
Exactly. But Charles J.P. Lucas does not stop the engine. Instead, he takes a highly combustible, extremely corrosive chemical solvent, the strychnine and the brandy, and pours it directly into the fuel line to force the engine to rev even higher.
That's a brutal analogy, but it fits perfectly.
The engine is going to continue running for a few more miles, but it's going to completely tear itself apart from the inside in the process. It is running purely on toxic fumes and friction.
That is the exact physiological reality of what was happening to Thomas Hicks, and the visual accounts of his final 2 miles are haunting. Charles J.P. Lucas actually wrote a book about the race later, and he described the effects of his own treatment with zero remorse.
This is chilling.
He wrote that Hicks' eyes became dull and lusterless. The color completely drained from his skin, leaving an ashen pallor. Hicks himself later recounted that he felt like heavy weights had been tied to his arms and legs.
The strychnine was actively attacking his central nervous system, causing extreme muscular rigidity. Meanwhile, the alcohol from the brandy acted as both a central nervous system depressant and a diuretic, which only accelerated the rate at which his body was losing water.
It was compounding the damage.
He was descending into a state of severe chemical toxicity and profound delirium.
He starts actively hallucinating on the course. He is only 2 miles away from the stadium, but his brain is so starved of fluids and so poisoned by the strychnine that he starts crying, begging the trainers for food, and hallucinating that the finish line is still 20 miles away.
A complete cognitive break.
He is entirely disconnected from physical reality.
All of the natural biological fail-safes we discussed at the beginning of our conversation have been completely obliterated by this chemical cocktail. He is no longer a conscious athlete making tactical decisions. He is a biological automaton being driven forward by toxic stimulation.
And the way he finishes the race is grotesque. He doesn't triumphantly jog into the stadium to the roar of the crowd. When he finally reaches the track, his legs completely give out. He no longer has the motor control to support his own body weight.
The engine finally seized.
So his 2 trainers, Lucas and another man, physically grab him under the armpits. They hoist him into the air, supporting his entire weight, and they carry him across the finish line. His feet are just limply dragging through the dirt, mechanically shuffling back and forth in a parody of a running motion.
By every standard of modern athletic competition, providing outside physical assistance to advance a runner is strictly forbidden and results in immediate disqualification. But the judges in St. Louis observed this and allowed it to stand.
They carry him across the line, and he is officially declared the winner. His finishing time is 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 53 seconds. To this day, that remains the slowest winning marathon time in the history of the Olympic Games by a margin of almost 30 minutes.
And that's despite the 1904 course being nearly 2 miles shorter than the modern standard marathon distance.
And the moment he crosses that tape, the artificial stimulation of the strychnine gives way to the reality of his condition.
He immediately collapses into a profound coma-like state. Upon medical examination, it was determined he had lost 8 pounds of pure fluid weight over the course of the race.
8 pounds of water weight. That is fatal dehydration levels. He was so incapacitated that he didn't even get to receive his gold medal or meet the president's daughter. He is rushed straight to the medical tent, where a team of 4 doctors has to work frantically to prevent cardiac arrest and save his life from the strychnine overdose.
4 doctors.
The attending physicians later stated that if Lucas had administered even 1 more milligram of strychnine, Hicks would have died right there on the stadium track. He eventually survives, falling asleep on a trolley car, leaving the fairgrounds later that evening. But the physical toll was so immense that Thomas Hicks never ran another marathon again.
The damage inflicted upon his body was permanent. But the broader historical implications of this event are massive. James E. Sullivan and Charles J.P. Lucas viewed their methods as a triumph of scientific endurance management.
They thought they were pioneers.
However, the wider medical community and future organizers viewed the events of that day with extreme alarm.
He saw exactly what it was, a man who was poisoned for the sake of public entertainment and a pseudoscientific theory.
Exactly. The poisoning of Thomas Hicks served as the ultimate catalyst for change. It laid the undeniable foundational groundwork for what would eventually be codified by the International Olympic Committee as Rule 4.
Rule 4 being the fundamental prohibition of performance-enhancing drugs.
Yes. Rule 4 explicitly stated that no competitor may take or receive any drug. The entire modern anti-doping movement, the testing protocols, the stripped medals, the ongoing debates about where the line is drawn regarding performance enhancement, all of it traces its ideological lineage directly back to the unpaved roads of St. Louis, the raw egg whites, and the rat poison administered to Thomas Hicks.
It's incredible to think about.
It forced the sporting world to confront the reality that without strict ethical boundaries and medical oversight, the pursuit of victory would literally kill the participants.
So when we pull all of these threads together, what is the grand synthesis of this entire unbelievable saga? We've talked about a chaotic World's Fair, racers dodging crosstown traffic, a postman taking a nap, a dispatch runner chased by wild dogs, a bricklayer hitching a ride in a car, and a winner fueled by rat poison.
It's almost too much to comprehend.
The 1904 Olympic Marathon was far more than just a poorly organized race. It was a profound reflection of a world in a state of chaotic transition.
It was a collision of different eras. You have the dying gasps of unregulated amateur sporting traditions meeting the dawn of the industrial age and the unchecked hubris of early science.
The imagery is just so vivid.
The image of the frail human body choking on the exhaust of the newly invented automobile on those dusty roads serves as a perfect metaphor for the age.
It was an era characterized by men like James E. Sullivan, who genuinely believed they could master and manipulate human biology through sheer force of will and deeply flawed theories like purposeful dehydration. But I think there's a deeply personal takeaway for you listening to this right now. Turin endurance isn't just about your physical capacity to survive the elements or push your muscles to the limit.
True endurance is very often about surviving the flawed systems and the terrible leadership that is placed over us.
Exactly. The runners who managed to succeed, or at least survive that day, men like Felix Carvajal, Len Tanyen, and even Thomas Hicks in his own tragic way, they didn't survive because the system was designed to support them.
They survived in spite of the system.
They survived because they adapted, they improvised, and they kept moving forward despite the absolute dysfunction of the environment built around them. They ultimately triumphed over the incompetence of their organizers.
It is a reminder that resilience requires navigating not just the inherent challenge of a task, but the artificial obstacles placed in our way by those who claim to know better.
So as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We look back at the events of 1904 with shock. We are appalled that medical professionals believed withholding water was beneficial and that trainers utilized rat poison as a legitimate sporting tool.
It seems like utter madness today.
The very foundational rules of modern sports fairness and basic safety protocols were written because of the extreme suffering of those 1904 runners. But progress is a continuum. So ask yourself this. What deeply held scientific, medical, or institutional beliefs of our current era things we accept right now as absolute, undeniable best practices will be viewed by people a century from now as sheer, unadulterated madness?
This is a vital question to ensure we continuously challenge our own assumptions and methodologies.
Thank you so much for giving us your time today. We love exploring these massive stories with you. If you found this history as fascinating as we did, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you these deep investigations. Check the description below for reference links and more information on everything we discussed today. Until next time, keep elevating your mind.
ALEATORY podcast.